So the size and the age of the cosmos are beyond human comprehension. In a cosmic perspective, human concerns seem insignificant, even petty. And yet our species is young and curious and brave and shows much promise. I believe our future depends powerfully on how well we understand this cosmos, in which we float like a mote of dust in the morning sky. So there's some words from a sort of childhood hero of mine, Carl Sagan, who was a cosmologist and a bit of an inspiration, I think, to probably a lot of people in my generation. He seemed to be able to breathe poetry into science, which was a real achievement. He goes on to say, he says something like, national boundaries are not evident when we view the Earth from space. Fanatical ethnic or religious or national chauvinisms are a little difficult to maintain when we see our planet as a fragile blue crescent, fading to become an inconspicuous point of light against the bastion and citadel of the stars. Travel is broadening. So that's wonderful, isn't it? Wonderful kind of evocation of a wider perspective, a cosmic perspective. And in a way, those words, he wrote them a few decades ago, I guess, I don't know when, feels sort of even more poignant these days, doesn't it, when we're racked with conflict in the world and so many people are fleeing from their lives, and somehow there's this sort of sense in which the world, to me, sometimes feels like it's a madder place than ever. And probably not true, probably it's just every generation feels like that. But on the other hand, there does seem to be quite a lot of madness around. And this sense of seeing our place in the cosmos would be, I think, a perspective, if we could even hold that just a little bit, that would change our pettiness. And I guess there's pettiness at all levels. You know, pettiness at sort of the level of me and mine and what I want. And then there's pettiness at the level of groups and nations and continents even, cultures and religions and so forth. And I sometimes think this pettiness is, in a way, the enemy of the Dharma life. And for us, probably in this country, where we're fortunate enough to live in a time of peace and relative prosperity, our sort of self-centered pettiness seems to manifest as a sort of madness for trivia. We seem to live more and more trivial lives, don't we? Or at least we're surrounded by more and more trivia, and sort of encouraged to kind of participate in that, encouraged to participate in a sort of endless stream of drivel. And it does feel to me that this, for us, now in this country, does feel like that's a big, big danger to the Dharma life. I hate to think that, I mean, I waste time, and I kind of hate to think that I might waste a life watching silly films or surfing the internet, or, I mean, I don't tend to use Facebook or social media, but even then, there's so much distraction, isn't there? There's so much distraction that is at the touch of a button. And then, yes, this pettiness, this sort of self-centeredness, I don't know, I kind of, it is slightly embarrassing when you look at your thoughts sometimes, isn't it? When you start to just, I don't know, even if you just stop and examine a train of thoughts, maybe there's thoughts in meditation. It's kind of embarrassing how often they're about me, or in your case, about you. Our thoughts are so self-referential most of the time, aren't they? Most of the time. At least all our prapancha, our distracted, discursive thought, is self-referential. In a way, you could say prapancha is this self-referential drivel. And of course, then that spills over. It sort of can't help but spill over into our actions. It doesn't sort of remain just in the privacy of our own thoughts. It can't help but spill over into our actions. And the danger, I guess, is that we just sort of shrink our consciousness around the smallness of me and mine. I've got a mug that I really like in the community, and it's definitely my mug. And I sort of find myself not putting it in the dishwasher because then somebody else might take it. Do you see what I mean? So I sort of have it in my room. I'm slightly, I am sentimentally attached to it. It is a nice mug. Well, it's more than a nice mug. It's black and a nice shape. It holds the right. But I bought it at. I went a year ago. I went to. I was fortunate enough to visit the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, and so this is a CERN mug. It says CERN on it, and then on the other side, the side you drink from, it has a mathematical formula that I don't understand at all, which is 4 lines long, all these squiggles, and anyway, that is the formula, yeah, that explains all the fundamental particles and forces known in the whole universe on a mug. And I don't know why I said that, but I think I was trying to illustrate something of my pettiness. Anyway, this cosmic perspective that Carl Sagan so beautifully evokes, I was thinking that in a way there's an analogy there between what consciousness can do. Because consciousness can either shrink into me and mine, or it can unfold and expand into, an infinite spaciousness, actually, an infinite expanse. Even infinite doesn't do it justice, because, as I'll touch on later, it's beyond space. Space is sort of a construct within it. It's actually completely unbounded, and yet it's not far away. It's there actually in every moment, everywhere. It's not far away. It's our perspective that keeps our experience small, not reality itself, if you see what I mean. Our perspective narrows it. I'll come on to this. But yes, this vision of the cosmos as being, that cosmic perspective, somehow the larger perspective is somehow truer, isn't it? When we're so locked into my life and my world as the centre of the universe, we've distorted what's really happening. It's a distortion. And there's an analogy there between what we as unenlightened beings do with our minds, as it were. We distort our experience, and therefore we cause ourselves pain and other people pain. There's a distortion going on. When Copernicus, his revolution, his great revolution, Copernican revolution, sort of overturned people's perspective of what it was to be human and on Earth completely. Until Copernicus came along with his heliocentric vision and theory, we really did think, human beings really did think, that the universe revolved around us. Yeah? Earth was the centre of the heavens, and it had to be the centre because God had made us in his image, and therefore we were central to the whole shebang. And all the stars and planets, everything was for us. And of course Copernicus turned that round and said, no, actually we revolve around the sun. We revolve around the sun. And of course that caused a sort of upheaval in a sort of existential crisis, an existential and religious crisis. No wonder the church was threatened by, well, Galileo and Copernicus. And I think there's a similar sort of Copernican revolution that we need to do, because the world can't revolve around me. Well, your world revolves around you. So immediately, as soon as there's you and me, one of us is wrong. And actually, both of us could be wrong. In fact, we are wrong, aren't we? We're very, very wrong to think that we are at the centre of our own universe. And yet that's how we behave, don't we? We do behave like that. Even with, I don't know, even with our friendships and loved ones, somehow what happens to me feels really central, doesn't it? Yeah, it really, really does. So it's very hard. It's so counterintuitive to turn this round. And yet I think that's what the Dharmic project is about. It is like a Copernican revolution of the mind that is called for. The Yogacara talks about it as the turning about in the deepest seat of consciousness. And it really is the deepest seat. Maybe I'll touch on that a little bit more. So let me just pause there. Probably I haven't said very much that's controversial, but I just want to see if there's any questions or comments about what I've said so far, about this analogy of a cosmic perspective to the perspective of what consciousness potentially is or truly is, and our delusion, our way of seeing, distorting reality so that we shrink it with me at the centre. Any thoughts or questions about? Does that seem straightforward? Oh, yes, I saw both hands go up. Maybe you first. Yes, so what you're talking about is literally having more spaciousness in your perspective, in your view, actually being in a more spacious space. And I think we all kind of need that, don't we? We all sort of yearn for the freedom and expansiveness of that. That's why people want to climb mountains and stand on the edge of the ocean. And there's this wanting to see the vastness or be surrounded by vastness. And in the city, that's what's so limiting, isn't it? We can't even properly see the sky. The reason I think that really does help, that spaciousness really does help the mind unfold, consciousness unfold. I'm not going to differentiate between mind and consciousness and awareness. I'm just going to use the terms rather loosely. But in meditation, I think there's something that we can do, even though we're sitting here with our eyes closed, we can imagine more space in our experience. Because when you've got your eyes closed, it's not that you feel that you're trapped in your little head. It doesn't feel like that, does it? There's always some sense of space, and that can grow or shrink. And we can encourage it to be more spacious just by imagination. When we do the metabhavana, well, I felt it this evening. It was as if my experience became more spacious as my heart opened more. So space and spaciousness is literally broadening, but also it's a metaphor for what can happen, and we can use this metaphor. Yeah, so thanks for... Yeah, did you have a... No. Okay, well maybe I'll move on. So I want to touch on, in a way, what it is that keeps... We'll expand a little bit more on what it is that keeps our experience narrow and confined and small. And at the root of it is this fundamental delusion that there's a real and fixed me and a real objective world out there in which I am sort of plonked and I'm trying to maneuver my way around, trying to be as, get as much as I can for me. But this sense of a real me and a real objective world, it's so intuitive, isn't it? It's so intuitive that to think that there's anything else apart from real beings, real people, real me's in a real world, to think that there's anything else is sort of, probably it just sounds mad. It sort of sounds mad. And yet, this is what the Dharma is pointing to. This is what the Buddha is pointing to, that there is no real entity called me, and there's no real objective world out there. Not seeing the truth of this, which most of the time probably most of us don't see the truth of this, not seeing the truth of this is painful. I mean, it's painful. The dukkha of this is intrinsic. Even if you're living a really happy life, not seeing the truth of this is painful compared to how it could be, because consciousness is confined. And consciousness naturally wants to be unbounded, limitless. So just this delusion is a painful prison of the mind. Even if your life is going really well. Yeah? But what's worse is that through this delusion, we do create even more suffering for ourselves and for others. So for example, from this root delusion, we've got this root delusion that's sort of pretty much innate. It's sort of hardwired. It's not a conscious thing, this. I'm not talking about a conscious kind of misreading. It's a sort of almost like a genetic level, you could say. It's hardwired into the nature of perception itself. The nature of perception, when we look at something or see something or hear something or whatever sense we use, the nature of perception seems to be saying there's a real me having this experience of a real objective world out there, doesn't it? So it feels very, 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 very deep. Out of that root delusion, we get our mental states, yeah? And our mental states, out of this root delusion, of course, are coloured by the poisons, the kleshas of craving and hatred. They, as soon as we've got this root delusion, the mental states, more or less, get coloured by that. So you've got unhelpful mental states that we then are, as it were, trapped in. And then out of unhelpful negative mental states, what happens is that we act in the world, in relationship with each other, and those actions, if they're coming from negative mental states, will be unskillful actions that cause more pain. Yeah? So you've got this root delusion out of which comes negative mental states that are deluded but become more afflicted with craving and hatred, and then out of that we've got unskillful action. This is the sort of unenlightened human samsaric conundrum, and all of that is painful. or it's at least unsatisfactory, even when we think it's going well. Even when we think it's going well. Of course, we're so locked into this framework, into this perspective, it's very, very difficult to even see it. It's very, very difficult to see that this is what's going on. If we could see it, we'd have sort of stepped outside of it. It would be like seeing the Earth from outer space. And then you'd think, oh, why did we create such a fuss over national boundaries and ethnic religions? And if you could see from above, we'd change. But we are sort of trapped, unenlightened beings, all are trapped in the framework that we've got. So the challenge of the Dharma life seems to be from within, seeing the delusion, from within the framework that's already deluded, learning to see that, which is a sort of way out. It is a way out if we can do that. But it's very, very counterintuitive. Very, very counterintuitive. So this three-level kind of issue of the root delusion, the mental states, and then the actions, you can see how the model of the threefold path of sila, samadhi, and prajna, ethics, meditation, and wisdom, are trying to reverse this. So first of all, we begin by working on our actions, trying to make them less self-centered, less unskillful, through ethics, through learning about the precepts, through sila. And then we work on the mental states more directly through meditation, through samadhi. And then finally, wisdom, prajna, is trying to tackle the delusion itself, so that we can see things as they are, as they really are, from this truer, realer perspective. So, sila and samadhi, the first two stages of that threefold path. Now, maybe I'll say one more thing before I go on to say anything about sila and samadhi. I was re-looking at one of Bante's lectures from the early or mid-70s, called The Path of Regular Steps and the Path of Irregular Steps. And in that lecture, he starts off by talking about the path of irregular steps. Are you all familiar with what the path of irregular steps is? It's that we start off, rather than working systematically through ethics, meditation and wisdom, working on our behaviour, becoming more skillful, then sitting down to meditate and working on the more subtle mental states, and then reflecting on the existential truth using the framework of the Dharma. Instead of that regular steps, most of us dive in somewhere in the middle. When I was a teenager, I started reading little popular books on Zen Buddhism, all about, the nature of reality. And I got really, really excited. And I thought, this is it. I want to experience this. And I wasn't interested in ethics. When I first came to the Buddhist Centre, I was in my 20s, and the first course that I did at the LBC was a 6-week course. It was sort of introduction to Buddhism, and I thought, this is it. I'm going to leave this course enlightened. I'm going to find out. And the course was on the 5 precepts. And I was really disappointed. I thought, I don't want to just be kind. Anybody can be kind. I want to be enlightened. And gradually over the 6 weeks, I sort of felt more and more sort of humiliated by what I was learning, positively shamed, as it were, by what I was learning. And these days, I think, ethics could be seen as the whole thing. Kindness could be seen as the whole path and the goal. But yes, in those days I wasn't interested in that sort of regularity. And what happens for most of us is that we move forward, we might come along, we might go on a retreat, we might meditate, we might have a positive experience, we might think, this is it, this is really it, I've found it. And then I don't know, Saturday night happens, we get drunk, and we're like, what was Buddhism about? And we're completely, we've sort of forgotten. I mean, you get this when you come off retreat, don't you? You can be on a retreat and it's just fantastic. You come off retreat and the last thing you want to do is practice. And of course, if we're not careful, we can then forget about the Dharma for long periods of time and then rediscover it. And I've met people certainly at the Buddhist Centre who rediscover it years later and say, oh, I'd forgotten how much this meant to me. And meanwhile, who knows how much dukkha has happened in their lives. But does this sound familiar, this coming and going in terms of the inspiration of the Dharma? Yes. Dukkha, sorry, I should say. Dukkha is normally it's translated as unsatisfactoriness. It's suffering. It's from the mildest sort of discomfort all the way to the most acute pain that life can bring us. So it's said that all of unenlightened existence, of samsaric existence, is shot through with unsatisfactoriness, with dukkha. So what Bhante says about this is that at some point, if we're going to make progress with the Dharma, we need to move from the path of irregular steps to the path of regular steps. At some point, if we just stay on the path of irregular steps, it runs out on us. You can't keep coming and going forever. Something happens in us and we'll stop making progress. But this move to the path of regular steps, say to this path of Sila, Samadhi, Prajna, I know that's just a model of the path, but it's a good model. The path of regular steps, that move is a very, very crucial step, and not everybody will take it. And one of the things that he says is that what characterizes this transition is commitment. What characterizes it is a decision to go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, to the three jewels, to make the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha the central defining, governing principles that you're going to orientate your life around. Without that commitment, we don't fully make the transition from the path of irregular steps to the path of regular steps. It takes that commitment. And of course, commitment is sort of, it feels like, well, it's in our culture, it feels sort of anathema, doesn't it, to what most people regard as positive. Commitment often has the ring of narrowing choice, which it does actually. It's not just the ring, it is a narrowing choice. And therefore, it has the connotation that I'm narrowing my freedom. And yet we all want to be free. Understandably, we want this spacious mind. But without commitment, without narrowing our choices, without committing to a path of regular steps, the freedom of mind doesn't arise. It doesn't arise. It's counterintuitive again. So it's really something to think about this. Bhante equates this commitment of putting the three jewels at the centre of one's life with ordination. Actually, you have to keep making it even after ordination. Even after wouldn't it be lovely if you could just be ordained and then put your feet up? But actually, if you're ordained, you know, or if you know an order member, you know, it's not quite like that. The commitment has to be remade again and again and again. And without that, we don't really make real progress. So that's a little bit about Sila, Samadhi, Prajna. Let me just pause there again and see if there's anything that struck anybody. Yes?
In the Buddhist time, people seem to be enlightened a lot easier than nowadays. And it seems to, I think maybe it seems to live more ethical lives.
Yeah.
Simple lives.
Simple lives as well, yeah.
Maybe part of it, that they kind of, it's almost like they were already treading the proper steps.
I think that might be part of it. In fact, I'm pretty certain that our complexity of life is a real hindrance. So probably in ancient India, maybe even in traditional societies or more traditional societies today, where life might be a little bit more simple, I think enlightenment probably is a lot easier. I think there are probably other factors involved, not least if you were in the presence of the Buddha. Consciousness, as well as not being sort of narrow, isn't just a private affair. If we could really experience the Buddha's mind, as it were, that would have an incredible impact on us if we were receptive. Not everybody was receptive to the Buddha, but I think if we were receptive, just the presence of the Buddha would have an enormous effect. But yes, the simplicity of people's lives must have had an effect. And I think also, and I'm going to come on to this later, views, cultural views. We live in an age where, well, I know we've got all sorts of views flying around our culture, but it seems to me a particularly nihilistic kind of age. Whereas in the Buddha's day, I think most people, not everybody of course, but most people would have been open to the fact that there was more to life, that there was something more than this world of appearances. And perhaps we have some inkling of that privately. Probably most of us at some point in our life have that inkling. In a way, we wouldn't be here had we not had that inkling. But culturally, we don't seem to have support for that view. Yeah? We live in a very nihilistic kind of age. So maybe those are, I mean, they're just off the top of my head, three kind of factors. Maybe there are others. It's worth kind of exploring. Why? But of course, not everybody did get enlightened, you know, and some people weren't even receptive to the Buddha. I better move on. So, Sila and Samadhi, ethics and meditation, the first two kind of stages, I'm not going to say very much about, but you could say that they're about loosening our self-centeredness, loosening our clinging to this idea of a me, letting go of, you know, all that grasping, putting that mug in the dishwasher, risking it. That would be a little bit of loosening, wouldn't it? It would be a broadening. And then prajna would be a complete seeing, or at least some sort of seeing, through this fundamental delusion. It's like we really are seeing the world through the wrong end of a telescope, and if we could turn it round, we would see it as it was. Our consciousness would just expand immediately, and somehow we wouldn't be so fussed about what we normally get fussed about. We wouldn't be really fussed about me in the same way. And when that happens, it's said that there's a freedom arises, a letting go arises, and a joy, and a bliss, and a fulfillment that we've been yearning for all the time and looking for in the wrong place, thinking that the way to get it is by grabbing and grasping more. So I want to say a little bit more about this root delusion that prajna is trying to see through or sort of break through. So I've mentioned that it involves thinking that there's a real self, a real me, and a real objective world in a real space and a real time. That seems to me our sort of common sense world view. And then, of course, there's insecurity as soon as we realise that, yes, there's a real me, but I'm mortal and will die. Right from that moment, there's an insecurity. There's an insecurity because, you know, there's an inevitable kind of end to this sense of real me that's coming my way, and I'm doing everything I can to, I don't know, ignore it probably. And I think scientific materialism strengthens this worldview. So scientific materialism is a view. It's not science, it's a view, it's a belief. It's a belief held by, I guess, many people, including probably many scientists. And that belief is that when we look at this world of things, they're real. They really are as they appear to be. That matter is real. And it's what you know, it's actually as it appears to be. And what's more, a scientific materialist view extends this to say that matter is all there is, and that consciousness, our experience of being aware, is just brain function. Because brains are incredibly complex, they have somehow conjured up this experience of being aware and alive. Now that would be scientific materialism. And scientific materialism is, even if you don't consciously hold it, it's permeated our culture so deeply, we take it as valid, as truth. Yeah, we take it pretty much as valid, most people, that when the body dies, that's it, the lights go out, finito. The traditional Buddhist view that actually consciousness is primary, that consciousness comes first, that the body is a sort of manifestation of consciousness, of mind, that consciousness doesn't therefore cease with the death of the physical body, that is said to be sort of counterintuitive. Yeah? And a scientific materialist would say, well, you've got no evidence for that. Well, if you hear that, you can say, well, you've got no evidence for your view either. You've got no real evidence that consciousness is emergent from matter. It's impossible, I think, to explain how seemingly inert matter like this could suddenly experience life and awareness if it really were inert. If it really were inert. The Buddhist position is that actually, as I say, consciousness is primary, and we don't really know what matter is, but nothing is inert. That consciousness is sort of manifesting as this, as world. I say all of that, but actually I don't know what I'm talking about, and it implies as if consciousness is a thing that's manifesting, and it isn't a thing. What's going on is beyond all things. So consciousness, in a way, we shouldn't have a noun for it. We shouldn't have a word for it. As soon as you have a word for it, and that word's a noun, you think it's a thing. But something else is going on that isn't about things. And it's not about an objective reality in an objective space and an objective time. I mean, one way of thinking about this is that all of our experience of things, when we look around us, all of our experience of things comes through our senses, doesn't it? It comes through our senses, and it comes through our mind. But our senses can't be revealing the way things really are. How can they be revealing the way things really are? It doesn't take much thought about the nature of perception to know that when you see the colour orange, that orange isn't actually innately existent. Orange is a perception that's arisen because there's some sort of phenomena called a wavelength of light, a particular wavelength of light that reaches your brain through your eyes and causes some sort of signal in the brain that then is communicated to your experience as orange. Yeah? And that is going on not just with colour, but with every sense. With every sense. We think that things are solid. We think that just because we can pick something up, it must be solid. But actually, well, a physicist would say that no, matter is mostly empty space. It really is mostly empty space. There's nothing solid around. And even between the empty spaces, the bits of matter that there might be, they're empty as well. Yeah, they're empty as well. There's nothing solid. There's nothing graspable there. The only reason that, I can hold this glass is, does anybody know why? From a physicist's perspective? Yes. Yes, it's electromagnetic repulsion and attraction. Which creates solidity, exactly. So, I'm not going to be able to explain all of that. But it is because something about the electrons, whatever they are, on the surface of my fingers and hands are repelling the electrons on the surface of the glass, and that repulsion, that force of repulsion, like two poles of a magnet repelling, that force of repulsion means that my hand doesn't just go through the glass, or the glass doesn't go through my hand, or we can't walk through walls, or whatever there is. It's not because it's solid, it's just that there's a force of nature called the electromagnetic force which repels. Yeah? So isn't that interesting? And if you were a neutrino, if you were reborn as a neutrino, it wouldn't be solid, because neutrinos don't feel electromagnetic forces, and they're very small, and the whole world would be empty,
So
literally.
Is that true of him as well?
Yes, it is, unfortunately. Yes, it is, and of you. So all I'm trying to say is that this, even from a scientific perspective, that's from a physics perspective, we don't know what matter really is, but it doesn't seem to be solid. It seems to be, if anything, it seems to be maybe something like vibrations of energy. Vibrations of energy.
It is real, isn't it?
Well, is it? Because what
No, we don't. It's not what we think it is, but it is there.
Well, is it? And Buddhism maintains an agnostic position about that. Buddhism says that it's not what we think it is. If there is something real there, behind the appearance, we'll never know what it is. And so Buddhism doesn't actually then try and say there is a real world or not. It just says, if there is something behind this appearance, you can never discover it. We can never know what it is. And interestingly, physicists would say, physicists of course start from the other end and say that matter is real. Yeah? They would start from the other end and say there's really an objective world out there. So there are really objective electrons in my hand and in the glass. And then when you actually try and find them, physicists can't find them. Or what they find is dependent on whether they're looking for a particular property. So an electron will behave as a real kind of particle if you look for it with that lens, as it were. If you don't look for it with that lens, it'll behave as a spread out wave that theoretically is spread out over the entire cosmic space. And what physicists then say is that when you're not looking, yeah, either as for a particle or a wave, when you're not looking, you cannot say anything about the electron. You can't even say that it exists. At least this is one interpretation called the Copenhagen interpretation.
Yeah.
You can't even say that it's there.
It's a long time.
We could. Talk to me afterwards. But all I can say is that even with modern physics, it's not obvious that there's an objective world. If there is an objective world, we don't know what's out there. So Buddhism would say, Buddhism doesn't worry about it. Buddhism says, if there is an objective world, we can't know it. What we do know is that our deluded perceptions and thinking causes pain, causes us to suffer, and let's do something about that. One of the dangers about talking like this is exactly that it starts to feel like, oh, there's nothing there really, yeah, including no real people, and therefore no reason to love, let alone be kind and help them, yeah? But actually, fortunately for us, that's not true. What the Dharma says is that when we start to see that things are not as they appear, that actually there are no fixed me's or sila bodhis or tables or chairs, when we start to see that through insight, not through some head reflection, but through insight, the heart opens in love. There's something that happens when we let go of... This is where I think the nihilistic perspective is so damaging. Because what Buddhism says is that, yes, this world of experience isn't really as we think it is, but what Buddhism says is there's something more. There is something more than this world of appearances. There's something behind this world of appearances, if you like, and that is what I'm calling this vast consciousness. And this vast consciousness, which is, you could say, manifesting as this world of appearances, is also love. It's also love.
It's not a love between objects, is it?
Not necessarily. No. It's more like metta magnified. It would be a bit like. I mean, I'm now talking. You've got to remember these are metaphors because language is now strained. I'll come back to you, my Bodhi. Language is straining because language is only able to talk in terms of subjects and objects. But if you understand all this as it were metaphorically or poetically, then it's pointing to something profound. And you could almost say that, you know, this appearance is love made manifest. Yeah? So the experience of seeing things as they are, rather than just the theory about it, would sort of release metta naturally. It would be Maha Maitri. It would be the great love. In a way, that's exactly right, that any progress in the Dharma should be manifest as more kindness, less selfishness. And if that's not what's happening, if we feel that we're becoming more aloof, more disconnected, feeling more alienated, then we've got the wrong end of the stick. Yeah. Well, that feels to me like there's a continuation between sila and samadhi and prajna. So when we act with kindness, there's an expansiveness. When we meditate on the metta bhavana, there's further expansiveness. And then if we were to see with wisdom, there would be further. There's a continuity. It's not like there's three separate things. Yeah. So I think yes, experience. But what's important, the reason I'm saying all this more theoretical stuff, is because our views really do limit our capacity to see things as they really are. Yeah, it's our views that govern this root delusion that we're going to have to work on. Mahabodhi. Yeah. I think you're right. Of course, you're right. But one of the things one can get into that I've seen sort of happen is that people can quite happily say, yes, everything is conditions, and still hold a nihilistic perspective. One can still hold a thoroughly materialist perspective and think that everything is conditions. One of the important things that I'm sort of trying to point to is that part of this, what's happening in conditions, is that the world is mind-made, or mind is governing appearance. So there's something beyond mere matter.
Yeah, well, that's what
I'm going to have to move on. Sorry, Marbodi, we'll talk later. We'll talk later. I'm going to move on. I can take a few questions, but I do want to finish by 9. So all I'm trying to point to is that there is something beyond this materialist kind of perspective, that this materialist perspective itself is saying that there is just, well, we don't really know what matter is even. And from a Buddhist perspective, mind is primary, or consciousness is primary. And yes, appearances are arising. It's not that everything is completely not happening, but it's not what we think it is. And these appearances are arising according to laws of conditionality. But what the important point about this perspective is not just a theoretical one. We need to take it into, as part of practice, we need to take it into meditation and see if it starts to loosen the clutches of me. And if it does, then we're onto something true. If it doesn't, then we've got it wrong. And I'm not going to be able to, in a way, explain all the subtle kind of pitfalls that one can go into with a wisdom perspective. The Buddha was saying that it's very, very, very difficult to understand even the truth of conditionality. You've really got to see it with insight, but you can go wrong. You can either go into a nihilistic perspective or you can go into an eternalistic perspective. And in a way, I'm not going to be able to do it justice. Probably everything I've said falls into one of those kind of two extremes.
Sorry, did you say again what the second extreme was?
Eternalistic, which would say that there is a real self or a real something, a real thing, a real principle even. But what I would also say is that before insight arises, in its fullness maybe, we can all have intimations that there is something more going on in life. I think we all have them. It's what Shraddha is, it's what faith is, but it's also an experience that arises when we see something beautiful. An experience of beauty is an intimation that there's more going on. It's almost as if beauty is something shining through ordinary form. Or the experience of love, metta, connection, communication, when we actually feel deeply in communication or resonance with somebody, is an intimation that consciousness isn't just about me and my little world, or that matter isn't something that is absolutely solid and divides us and separates us. There are intimations that human beings have had probably since human beings first emerged. So I think it's those that we have to kind of trust and those that we have to build on. And if we keep doing that together with sila and samadhi, then I think we do gradually move towards making this view not just a view but an experience. And if we can do that, then what happens is that for a while anyway, as long as the experience lasts, it's as if we do step outside this framework. It's as if we do see the earth from outer space. There's an aha moment and you think, how silly I've been. How silly I've been to be so self-centered. How silly. There was only love. That was the only thing that made sense. There was only connection. There was only freedom. How death doesn't matter. because what is there to die? All of that would completely be obvious, and it wouldn't just be an intellectual thing. It would be an experience of our whole being or non-being. It's a little like, I sometimes use an image of the ocean. It's a bit like consciousness is a vast ocean, but imagine an ocean that's shoreless, that's infinite in its expanse and infinitely deep. And all the ripples on the surface of the ocean are this world of form and appearance, this whole universe that we think is the whole world. And then what we do is we identify with one of those ripples, don't we? And we say, this is me. This little ripple is me. And then we get really worried that we might get swamped by a bigger ripple, or that ripple is better looking than I am, or what will happen when I disappear. We angst about our little world, but actually this perspective that we're talking about would be like dropping that identification and seeing the whole expanse. There would still be the surface, but now it would just be a surface of dancing patterns and light and beauty. Nothing to worry about. I think that I want to finish with something that David Foster Wallace wrote, or said actually, a writer who died very tragically when he was very young. And I want to finish this as a sort of warning to myself, to you, about how easy it is, particularly when we're on the path of irregular steps, to forget those intimations of truth and beauty and love. How easy it is to think this world is all there is, to fall back. And if we do that, once we've discovered the Dharma, if we fall back, it feels to me like we're betraying our whole life, our potential. And that to me feels really, really tragic if that happens. And of course, I see it happen in a centre. So this, well, you'll see, I'll read this passage. It's a warning against not getting lost in this samsaric realm, and also not forgetting that there's something more. And then I'll finish. Because here's something else that's true. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshipping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what we worship. And an outstanding reason for choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship, be it Christ or Allah, be it Yahweh or the Wiccan Mother Goddess or the Four Noble Truths or some infrangible set of ethical principles, is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap the real meaning of life, then you will never have enough. Never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die 1,000,000 deaths before they finally plant you. On one level, we all know this. It's been codified as myths and proverbs, cliches, bromides, epigrams, parables, the skeleton of every great story. The trick is to keep the truth up front in daily consciousness. Worship power, you will feel weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to keep the fear at bay. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out, and so on. Look, the insidious thing about these forms of worship is not that they're evil or sinful, it's that they are unconscious. They are default settings. They're the kind of worship you just gradually slip into day after day, getting more and more selective about what you see and how you measure value, without ever being fully aware that that's what you're doing. And the world will not discourage you from operating on your default settings, because the world of men and money and power hums along quite nicely on the fuel of fear and contempt and craving and frustration and the worship of self. Our own present culture has harnessed these forces in ways that have yielded extraordinary wealth and comfort and personal freedom. The freedom to be lords of our own tiny, skull-sized kingdoms, alone at the centre of all creation. This kind of freedom has much to recommend it, but of course there are all different kinds of freedom. And the kind most precious you will not hear much talked about in the great outside world of winning and achieving and displaying. The really important kind of freedom involves attention and awareness and discipline and effort and being able truly to care about other people and to sacrifice for them over and over in myriad petty little unsexy ways every day. That is real freedom. The alternative is unconsciousness, the default setting, the rat race, the constant gnawing sense of having had and lost some infinite thing. Thank you very much.